Welcome to the podcast. My name is Chris, and I'm the host of Is It Just Speculation? Stick around for more. Áine-Lisa Shannon is a marine biologist communicator with a Master's of Science in Marine Biology. Áine specializes in aquaculture sustainability, the environment, and science communication, working with kids throughout Ireland with programs like STEM. Her focus is to raise awareness about aquaculture and science in Ireland to inspire the next generation. Hi. So just to get it right, is your name Anya?
Yeah, it's Áine, yeah.
Awesome. That was like the most stressful thing. I was like, let me make sure I get the name right.
No, it's a very typical Irish name, so don't worry about it. A lot of people pronounce it wrong.
Okay. Well, I'm glad I got that right. So, yeah, so let's just go ahead and get started. Can you tell us about yourself and kind of what you do as a marine biologist?
Yeah, so I'm an Irish marine biologist and I'm based in County Cork in Ireland and I work in the aquaculture industry. So my main job is I'm a project facilitator in the aquaculture industry, and basically what that means is I travel all around Ireland teaching students and young children about the aquaculture industry. And so I talk about how we farm some species in Ireland, the species we do farm in Ireland, and the health benefits that seafood can provide to our bodies, and the jobs that the fishing and aquaculture industry can bring to our local rural communities.
Okay, so for a lot of us landlocked people, because where I'm from is Texas, and there's like nothing around but desert. So
Oh,
for
wow.
us, thinking of farming and water is kind of weird. What is aquaculture?
So aquaculture is essentially the farming of plants and animals underwater. So we farm sheep and cows and everything else on land, and that's just called agriculture. And aquaculture is the exact same, except it's underwater.
Okay, so is this like fish farming where people might go to the store and buy like farm raised salmon or something?
Yeah, they will. So, I mean, there's a lot of misconception when it comes to fish farms, and there's a lot of negative stigma even here in Ireland. But I mean, I think we've already fished to our maximum capacity worldwide. So fish farming really is the only way to go as of now. And in Ireland, I don't know about America and stuff, but I do know in Ireland we are extremely strict when it comes to the fish farms, and like the regulations are so high. So like the fish that we kind of sell and stuff in Ireland is mainly farmed. And like the top three species that we farm in Ireland would be salmon, oysters, and mussels. I think the oysters are Pacific as well, so they're not Atlantic ones because they're actually easier to farm the Pacific ones.
Yeah, and I don't think a lot of people would think that's the case because Ireland's surrounded by nothing but water. So you would think, it would be easier just to not fish farm, but just go out and catch them normal. Why is it different in Ireland?
Well, see, there's a lot of issues now surrounding that as well. Like we are an island surrounded by seawater, and there is a wealth of opportunities to explore. But because we're part of the European Union, we have given a lot of our fishing quotas away to other countries. So there is a lot of drama going on at the moment now. Basically, I think Norway have been given a lot of our quotas here in Ireland to fish for mackerel. So there's a lot of Irish fishermen now that are kind of really disgruntled about that. So basically, because we're part of the EU, we have to, you have to kind of bring something to the table. When we joined
Yeah.
in the 1970s, so that was what we had. Like, we were an island surrounded by water, and like off the coast of Ireland, it's actually extremely deep. So once you kind of reach a couple of 100 miles off, it just drops down to about 2,000 kind of meters. It's like really deep. So we do have a lot of fishing going on there. So we just kind of gave away a lot of our quotas. So that's why we've turned to aquaculture and fish farming at the moment.
Okay. So, one thing I'm not sure about, and some people probably aren't, really sure of either, is does fish farming eliminate like toxicants like mercury and other things that kind of seep into natural fish?
Yeah, I suppose it would. I mean, the mercury kind of gets passed down the food chain, and that's why they say tuna can be quite harsh on the body, and we shouldn't actually eat a lot of it. So, like the fish farms in Ireland, we still give, well, I say we still give them fish meal. Like we would use a lot of smaller fish to feed them, but it's mainly made up of like a yeast extract as well. So I think the mercury would be a lot lower than it would be in the wild, which would be a benefit as well. And I think a lot of people are worried about like, diseases in fish farms because they're all people think that like salmon and stuff in the fish pens are like jam packed in.
Yeah.
But in Ireland, they're actually not. For every 99% open seawater, it's actually 1% salmon in Ireland. So we're actually really strict with the regulations here. So they're actually, I think they would be a lot cleaner, to be honest, compared to wild salmon. But I think some people would still disagree with me. So I should be careful what
Yeah.
I say.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is just the misconception of maybe comparing fish farming to, normal cows and,
Yeah.
pigs farming, because on in that side it is pretty crowded for a lot of it. And, I don't know if the regulation is the same where you have a certain amount of space per animal, but I know in America anyways, it can be pretty packed up. And so there's a lot of, pushback against, crowding animals like that. Is that kind of the case with fish farming?
Yeah, I mean, I think in America, I think you'd have I think they'd be a bit more jam-packed than compared to Ireland.
Mhm.
Like Ireland is just so strict on like agriculture and aquaculture. And I mean, you guys have a lot more mouths to feed as well. It's like 100 million people live in America. Is that how many it is? Or is it more?
I think it's more than that. I don't know the exact number, so
Yeah.
I don't want to
Whereas
put
like
out
in
a good.
Ireland, I know, yeah. Whereas in Ireland we have 5 million people, so it's not as so I
Oh
can see why I can see why people would be kind of like annoyed with it. But I mean, even in the agriculture industry, I mean, they still are pretty like jam packed together. Like even in Ireland, they still have a lot of space, and a lot of our food is definitely free range, and it really is of the highest standard. But I think there's just a misconception with aquaculture because obviously we've been farming terrestrial animals on land for so long and we can see them, whereas you can't see what goes on under the water. So I think people are just, it's like fear of the unknown.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, so I think it's still relatively new, and there have been mistakes made in the
Mm.
aquaculture industry. There's no denying that, but there also has been in the agriculture industry as well. And people are worried about diseases and stuff with fish farms, but I mean, you still get diseases with cows and sheep and pigs and everything. I mean, we've had that issue before as well. So I think it's just so new that people are just so against it as of now. But it's really the only way to go at the moment because their population is constantly increasing, and
Yeah.
it is a reliable protein source.
Yeah, it's interesting work of field because, before I reached out to you, I really didn't know too much about aquaculture. And, hopefully a lot of my listeners maybe are in the same boat and get a lot out of this. What motivated you to get into that kind of work?
Well, so I like when we studied marine biology and stuff in college, and then when I did my master's, like there was only a small kind of section on aquaculture, and I actually didn't know a lot about it. And I myself kind of had a bit of a negative stigma around it. I was just like, no, I didn't think it was that good. I just heard so much negativity surrounding it. And
Mhm.
then I got offered this job. Well, I applied for this job, and the job was really kind of science communication. That's what it focused on. And I ended up like properly reading into, aquaculture in Ireland and stuff before I took the job. And I was like, oh, it actually isn't as bad as I thought. And I think there's another concern where people think that the sea pens, the salmon farms and stuff can destroy the seabed.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of issues surrounding that. But I know in Ireland what they do, it's a term called fallowing. So it's the same with what they do with pigs and sheep and stuff on land. Once they farmed the animals, they'll like leave the soil and leave the area for like a year or two to let it
Okay.
replenish again. So they do the same in Ireland as well. They won't just continuously farm salmon in the same area because it would do a lot of damage to the seabed and the marine environment around there. So I think my goal was just really, I just wanted to encourage people like to to actually eat farmed fish, and it isn't actually as bad as people think. I mean, like it really is the highest quality here in Ireland. That was my goal, and that's why I took the job offer as well.
Yeah. Speaking of being a science communicator, I know you do some work with kids in Ireland. What kind of work do you do, and how did that start?
So so basically with this job, because we're promoting aquaculture in Ireland, we actually travel around Ireland in a big yellow truck, and it's kitted out to look like a submarine, a yellow submarine.
Okay.
It's actually really cool, and like when you can get you hop into the truck, and it's totally self-expanding. It's so modern in it, and it can hold up to 30 students. So what we do in Ireland is we will travel around and we will visit schools kind of near the coastal regions. of Ireland where we would do a lot of fish farming and there's a lot of fishing going on. And we will get, it's kind of the older students, so it's like 10-year-olds to like 12-year-olds, and they'll hop on and we'll do like a whole workshop with them for the entire day. And that's my job really. So I'd spend the day with them, kind of teaching them about aquaculture. And then I've just worked with kids before that as well, doing a lot of STEM projects. Have you heard of that? Science,
Yes.
technology, engineering, and mathematics. So I've worked with kids on that before. So I did a lot of experience with them, kind of teaching them science experiments. And I just loved working with kids because I feel like you have to kind of start there, and then the kids will like talk to their parents about what they've learned, and then it'll make the parents listen. And they are the future. As cheesy as it sounds, the kids really are the future. So it's the best place to
Yeah.
start.
Yeah. I was actually talking to my oldest son about it, and I was asking him like what he would ask you, and he's like, "Well, why are tropical fish so colorful?" I was like, "That's a really good question. Like, I never would have thought to ask something,
Yeah.
simple like that. But maybe you can answer his question. Why are tropical fish usually so different?"
Yeah, I think personally, I think the reason they would be so different to, I don't know, let's just say pelagic open water fish, I would say it's to
Mhm.
blend in with the coral reefs because they're so colorful. So I would think it would be to deter predators, or like a camouflage thing, because if you look at tuna and other fish that
Mhm.
are like out in the open deeper waters, they're normally like a silvery kind of blue gray color. That is to blend in with the water column, so predators find it hard to see them.
Yeah, he's gonna love that answer. So
Oh, that's
I think
great.
that's great.
I would say it's to blend in definitely, because there's so many colors in like each coral reef, especially in places like Australia and stuff.
Yeah,
Definitely
that
to blend in.
yeah, that makes sense. He's always about those questions now that he's a little bit older, so he's asking all kinds of questions nowadays. So that's great to be able to kind of touch on that.
It is,
What
and like,
animals do you work
sorry,
with?
go on. Oh,
Mhm.
so I would mainly like my job, I would visit the fish farm. So I just work with a lot of oysters and mussels and salmon. That's kind of it. But like my job beforehand, I used to go on research vessels and I'd be out at sea for maybe like a month or 25 days at a time. So I would just do a lot of so we worked on ground fish surveys, and that was just a group of scientists just collecting species. We were bottom trawling, and that was just to see how well the stocks were around Irish waters, because as I
Mhm.
said, we do have really deep waters, so there is actually a lot of life out there. So what we would do is we would trawl the seabed. It would only be a small trawl now. It wouldn't be like a huge, massive like fishing trawler that would just take
Yeah.
thousands and thousands of fish. We just take a small sample and we'll bring them up onto the ship, and we will just identify them. So we'll identify the sex, whether they're male or female, and what stage in their life they're at. So some of them could be producing eggs at the moment or sperm. And then we would also take the fish's otoliths. Have you ever heard of an otolith on a
I
fish?
have not heard of that.
So it's essentially they're like two bony plates at the top of a fish's head, and you can actually determine how old a fish is by looking at it. It's a great, like, I compare it to the ring of a tree. So
Mhm.
you can actually they're literally like faint lines. They're teeny tiny little plates, and we take those out, and you can actually identify how old a fish is. It's the same as if you were looking at a tree. If you cut down a tree and you could see the rings inside of it. So that's what we
Okay.
would do as well. We check how old they are. And then yeah, so I did a lot of other kind of research as well. I worked on deep sea research vessels where we used an ROV to like track the seabed, so a remotely operated vehicle.
Okay.
And like around Ireland as well, we have a lot of cold water corals. So they're not actual like coral reefs that you would see in Australia. They're really deep down, and coral reefs in Australia, they use sunlight to produce their food, whereas the ones we have off the coast of Ireland are really slow growing, and they actually just have to catch their food. So they just catch the particles in the water. So we have a lot of them around Ireland, which a lot of people don't know about, and they're about 2,000 to 3,000 meters deep. So we did a lot of surveys on cold water reefs around Ireland too, which were really cool.
So are you diving a lot, or at least whenever you're going out on sea like that, would you just use the ROV, or would you actually be going down under and spending some time
Oh
with?
yeah. No, we wouldn't. Like it's so deep that like you couldn't go down. I mean, normal recreational divers, the max you can actually dive to is 40 meters, whereas this is like super deep sea. This is like
Okay.
3,000 meters. So like, no, there's no way we wouldn't even be
Okay.
allowed like get into the water. It's so far out, like in the middle of the ocean, that like you can't. There's no land anywhere near us. It really is like proper like oceanic water, like extremely deep and like high swells. So they're actually very strict in Ireland about stuff like that. Like we can't even walk around on the outside of the ship without having like a hard hat on and or a life jacket on. Whereas other countries, I
Okay.
know they're a lot more flexible.
Yes. Okay. So, one of the things I was wondering is, do you in your work still deal with invasive species of fish? Is that something you have to worry about?
We wouldn't normally work with invasive species, but I do know we have a couple of invasive seaweeds and stuff around Ireland. So I was out sampling oysters there, I think it was 2 weeks ago, and we found a species of seaweed called Sargassum. And that species, I think it's from like Portuguese waters. It's a lot kind of warmer, but because I think due to climate change and stuff, they started kind of coming into our waters. Well, I do know the reason the seaweed actually originated in Ireland is because someone had their own marine tank. I think just like it was in their
Okay.
kitchen or something, and they just dumped it into the water. They probably thought they were doing a good deed, but it ended up being an invasive species, and now it's after taking over Irish waters, and it just completely smothers any other types of seaweed. So it has these little air bubbles in the seaweed, and it just floats to the surface of the water. So it totally just blocks out everything else in the water,
Okay.
and it just smothers everything. So we do have some issues with invasive species, but I wouldn't necessarily work with them, no.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. I, wouldn't have thought that seaweed would be something you have to worry about. I was always thinking, an invasive actual fish rather than a plant. So that's really interesting that you brought that up.
Yeah, no, they're
Um,
really like we have problems with fish and like shellfish and stuff, but yeah,
yeah.
seaweeds as well would have a major issue too. Yeah.
Yeah, and that goes with the food chain you're talking about earlier, because if the seaweed affects everything else around it, then that eventually does affect the fish, which
Yeah.
affects the fishing also.
Yeah, for sure.
So, you use the underwater drones basically. Do you use above surface drones to maybe get like a aerial view of what you're looking at?
We haven't necessarily, but I do know some research companies now in Ireland are starting to use the drones, but it's mainly the ROVs that we have. We do have, there's one in Ireland, and he's the ROV that we would use. I mean, it's actually the size of a truck. It's so big. I think it costs like 1.5 million euro to like create. So like it's not just like a tiny camera, because it has to be able to withstand the water depths and the pressure
Hmm.
as well. So they're massive, like giant trucks. So we do use those for every now and again. But if it's just a small survey, we just use like these smaller kind of ROVs. They'd probably be about the same size as like a just a regular size TV. But yeah,
Okay.
we wouldn't normally use the drones above air. No.
Okay. So since pandemic's been going on, has that changed the way you've been able to do work, especially with kids? Like, are you having to do more virtual video
Yeah. Oh,
type calls?
yeah, definitely. I mean, because like since COVID hit, we actually weren't allowed going to the schools. I'm still actually not allowed into the schools as of yet, even though like I'm fully vaccinated and stuff. They're still really
Yeah.
strict at the moment. So what we've had to do now is we had to like adapt our content. We had to create online webinars for the students. So they're normally like I would host maybe two or three of them a week, and it's basically just a reduced content of what I used to teach in the workshop when we visited the schools. So we talk about the geographical locations of fish farms and why we kind of place them where we do place them, and the health benefits seafood can bring, and the jobs it can bring to our area, and why we started farming. Like it really does date back to like the hunter gatherer technique, 10,000 BC,
Yeah.
because until we actually started farming our fish, and not our fish, sorry, until we started farming, cows and pigs and sheep, that gave us more opportunities to go out and actually develop and evolve as a society. And that's how we became more advanced as humans, really. I think that's how it all started. So we kind of go back to the very basics. So I would teach webinars now talking about that, but they're really only 30 minutes long. Like it's to I really wish I could go back into schools right now, because it's just kids listen more when you're like talking to them face to face, and they
Yeah.
understand it a lot better. But yeah, so I think we're looking to go back into the schools hopefully after Christmas, but I mean, you never know. We'll see. But I think we what we do in Ireland, I think some scientist from Canada as well, he was over visiting right before COVID and he saw what we were doing. So I think they're actually trying to bring some similar work over to like the Canadian regions because I know fish farming is quite big over in Canada as well. That'll be interesting to see in the future.
Yeah, you mentioned kind of deciding where you put those fish farms at. What goes into deciding where you put it at, especially in Ireland where it's surrounded by water? Like what makes one place better than the other?
So in Ireland, I mean, we are actually really suited for agriculture because our weather is so mild. So there is like a huge amount of agriculture here. So that would mainly be in the Midlands and along the east coast. But along the west of Ireland, kind of like we're facing like the Atlantic Ocean. It's really the land is like really rocky and like full of mountains. So the weather and soil quality is extremely poor. And these regions, that's where we kind of have our most rural regions. So like Dublin will or that's our capital, that would be on the east coast. Belfast, which is another big city, that would be on the north, and then Cork, where I'm based, would be the south. So all along the western region is very poor. So we do have kind of a big city called Galway, but aside from that, it really is rural. So because they can't farm any cattle along there, we just as a country we kind of realized, right, we can't use the land. So but what they did have was endless amounts of sea, so that's why we started to create our fish farms and our oyster farms and the mussel farms. And then in turn, then being able to build those farms, it keeps jobs in the area and it also brings more jobs into the area as well. So then, you might start off by, having a local shop there, and then that might eventually bring a school. So we talk about that as well with the kids, like the socio-economic benefits that
Yeah.
that building a fish farm can bring to a local community.
Okay. One thing I was wondering is, I don't know if you ever saw, but during kind of the early start of the pandemic, there were reports of like India being super clean in the air from having the lockdowns in place. Was there any kind of similar thing with the oceans where we saw that there was a increase in maybe the quality of the oceans or the fish or anything like that?
Yeah, I know in Ireland we definitely saw a big difference in the water quality and especially the air as well, because where I live in Ireland, it's quite industrial. There will be a lot of ships kind of coming through and stuff like
Yeah.
that. The air quality massively increased. I don't you've probably heard of it as well over in America. Venice in Italy. Did you see photos of the water quality during COVID? It was just amazing to see the difference. Because
Yeah, it
obviously
looked
they have like
like a fish tank you
they've
could just see through.
yeah, it was crazy. So I mean, Ireland, yeah, the water quality definitely did get better, but I think unfortunately now it's kind of going to go back to the same way because it's just like everything went back to normal. Yeah, it was great to see it when we were in lockdown, but I don't think
Mhm.
anything changes unless someone else puts in laws.
Yeah, what do you think we can take away from that? Because that was like a real weird experiment where we could actually see the impact of humans versus without humans, like how different it could be.
Oh, I mean, like we should really take and use that as an example. I don't think we will. See, the problem, like the thing is, I mean, people are so worried about climate change and stuff at the moment, but like nothing's being done. At the
Yeah.
end of the day, I think climate change is going to happen anyway. I think our waters are going to get warmer. The temperature is going to get warmer. We're the ones that are going to have the issues. Like humans are the ones that are going to become extinct, whereas the animals, yeah, like obviously certain animals and stuff will become extinct, but like the earth will always bounce back.
Yeah.
It's we've had a lot of mass extinctions before, and now we're coming towards our very own man-made extinction. That's the first one we're ever going to have, but the earth is going to bounce back. It's humans that are going to be in trouble. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I was gonna ask you like what kind of uh effect does pollution research have with your work? Is there any, similarities that you kind of tackle on that?
Yeah, so I know shellfish, the oysters and the mussels and stuff that we farm, they're really fragile at the moment because we can have like we get a lot of like algal blooms and they can just completely poison the shellfish, and then we can't sell them, and then the farmers that have the oysters, they literally just have to throw them away. And we also get a lot of jellyfish blooms as well that can have a lot of like major effects on the fish farms and stuff. So especially with the algal blooms, like they tend to be more common when our waters are at our warmest, because they just end up blooming, and then because there's so many of the little algae in the water, they just consume all the oxygen, and then that can just the water is just totally oxygen depleted, so then everything just dies off. And then with the jellyfish blooms as well, people are worried as well, because they reckon because their waters are warm that there's more jellyfish coming into coastal regions, and
Yeah.
then they can just kill off a lot of the fish farms. So there we're having problems with it as well, with the climate change and like diseases and stuff coming through.
Yeah, you mentioned oxygen in underwater. I think a lot of people might not know that you have to have oxygen with the water for the fish to still be able to survive. Can you talk a little bit about how that works?
Yeah, so I mean, everything needs oxygen to survive unless you're like in an extreme environment.
Yeah.
Aside from that, like everything needs oxygen, and a lot of our waters, so the faster the flowing of a water, so like rivers and stuff will be highly oxygenated because they're constantly moving. And especially in our oceans as well, we take a lot of our oxygen from the atmosphere, so that's absorbed in. But if there's too much of one species in the water, that can consume all the oxygen. So especially algal blooms, because it's just hundreds and hundreds of thousands of them, and they're all microscopic, so you can't see them. And that will literally just consume the oxygen in the water. And then any other fish that need the oxygen to survive, or sharks or stingrays or anything, end up just dying. That's why you can have a lot of oxygen depleted zones and very still water where it's not fast flowing at all. They can be very oxygen depleted as well, because they're not like gathering enough oxygen from the surface or from the atmosphere. So it's just very still water. That's why you would find a lot of those areas would be quite poisonous, and you wouldn't actually be able to drink that water.
Okay. Well, thank you for touching on that. I think that's a lot of, uh, something that a lot of people don't really know affects fish is oxygen. They would think it's just underwater, so they don't need oxygen. So definitely glad you brought that up.
And a
Um,
lot of people
mhm.
don't realize as well, you can get your oxygen from your trees. You actually get oxygen from your phytoplankton as well, which is just the tiny, tiny algae in the water. And the algae, they get it through photosynthesis as well. But that actually produces 70% of the world's oxygen. People think it's the trees that have the highest O2 content, when it's actually the algae. That's why we really do need to protect our oceans as well.
Yeah, I had no idea that that was, the case. I always thought it was mostly from trees, also, and it's weird because there's just like a whole different ecosystem underwater that really is probably as important or more important than what's on land.
Yeah, I think it's just, again, like I'll touch back to the fact that we can see trees, and it's just easier to explore on land, whereas the ocean, it
Mhm.
still is like a very kind of foreign area to us. So I think that's why people don't realize it. And even myself, before I studied marine biology, I always thought it was like, save the trees, which like I still agree
Yeah.
with, save the trees, but save the oceans as well.
Yes. So, can you talk about microplastics and maybe how that impacts marine and human life?
Yeah, so microplastics, they don't actually start off that small. Microplastics start off as, let's just say, a plastic bottle of water that might be thrown into the sea. And because it doesn't break down naturally, plastic, it just gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And then fish and seabirds and other marine species will mistake that for food. And then it just basically just travels into the food chain. So let's just say one small fish um, a might think it's plankton, and then that they'll consume it, and then a bigger fish will come along and consume it. I think the issue right now is every marine species in our ocean has some form of plastic in it. We did a study when I was studying my master's, we did a study on marine snails. So they're called dog whelks, and
Mhm.
they're found all over the coast of Ireland. And we did a study on them, and we collected a few on the shore, and we brought them back to the lab, and we looked under the microscope, and every single one of them, and these were just snails, essentially like marine snails, had a piece of microplastic in them, because it never breaks down. So any piece of marine litter that is in the ocean is eventually going to end up in marine species. So it is a huge concerning, like it is a massive concern, especially because we don't, like, plastic is still it's still relatively new, so we don't know kind of the diseases it's going to bring, and even the chemicals that they use to produce this plastic, it's just so unnatural. So it's not really nice to consume it. That's another reason as well. Actually, I think they were talking about, fish farms are a bit more positive as well, because in the
Yeah.
wild, you don't know what the fish is going to eat, and then you're going to consume it as well. So that can be an issue too.
Yeah, I think there's maybe a misconception that just because they're wild and they're not, in an enclosure, that they're eating better, eating healthier, maybe more healthy in general, just because they get to swim around freely. But we don't really
Yeah,
take into account maybe what they're eating and what the things that they eat are eating. So I can see how that'd be an issue. One of the
yeah,
things
for
with
sure.
microplastics is that's on a small side, but on the bigger side of things, do you know about the Pacific Garbage Patch? And if you do, can you maybe talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, so I know a little bit about it.
Mhm.
I've from what I know, it's just one giant patch of garbage in the Pacific, and it's basically the reason that the plastic and the rubbish is ending up in there is because of these giant gyres. So they're just like huge currents that are just moving all the rubbish in there.
Mhm.
But from what I've heard, the 10%, I think it's like, from what you can see on the surface of the water, the rubbish that you can see there, there's like 99%, like that's only 1% of what we can see is all that garbage that's on the top. Like 99% of it is like totally underneath. It's like the tip of an iceberg. That's what they kind of compare it to.
Yeah.
So I do know like there's a lot of issues surrounding that too. But I mean, even in Ireland, off the coast of Ireland, when we've done our deep sea studies, you could be 2,000, 3,000 meters deep, like with the ROV, the underwater camera, and like we still see rubbish down there. It's crazy. Like there's just rubbish in every part of the ocean right now. I think they did a study as well recently on the Mariana Trench, the deepest part of the ocean, and they
Yeah.
found rubbish down there, and the species as well. I think they found microplastics inside those species as well. So nowhere is safe at the moment, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. It can spread so quickly. And like you said, they never really go away. They maybe degrade into smaller pieces, but they don't actually, disintegrate.
Exactly. Yeah, and like I mean, it's never going to leave the oceans. That's the way I see it. I mean, we're just going to keep dumping stuff in, and I mean, I know countries are becoming more strict on how, you disperse of your rubbish and your garbage and stuff, but I mean, it's still always going to be in our oceans. So I think that's going to be a huge concern as well. So we'll see where that goes, but I'm kind of worried.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing I wrote down as a note is because whenever I was looking up kind of like what happened in the ocean, I saw about the garbage patch. And that's something I've known about, but I didn't really understand how bad it was. But it's supposedly 2 times the size of Texas for my local friends. And if you're in
Wow,
Europe, 3 times the size of France. So it's
that is
huge, and that's just
crazy.
out there floating in the water.
Yeah, I did watch a documentary before, and they
Mhm.
they said I think it's just certain areas are so dense with the garbage, and then other areas like they couldn't really see that much. But it's crazy how like just these giant currents can just throw all the rubbish into like one big area. And like
Yeah.
I feel so sorry for the fish and everything that's like surrounding that area. That's one thing I need to look into. I wonder, is there much marine life there? Because I would say any marine life, any seabirds and stuff would just choke on the rubbish.
Yeah, and one of the things I was curious about, and I know this is not your area of expertise, but about extremophiles and different kind of animals that can live in real hostile places.
Yeah.
I am curious too. Maybe they can live where that trash is. Maybe they feed off of it. Maybe there are different kinds of new species there that maybe weren't there before that kind of adapted to live off of that because it is basically a giant island with the size it
Oh
is.
yeah. I mean, I would totally believe that there's species right now that have evolved to like live around there. I mean, we have species that are living down in hydrothermal vents. I mean, we
Hmm.
have crabs, we have marine worms that are just feeding off the gases and stuff. I mean, that's crazy. Just the heat that's down there is just immense, and like even the pressure. So I would totally believe that there are animals living around there. But see, then I suppose the other side is they're not really, it's not organic at all. It's totally inorganic. So would they be digesting it? I feel like it would just be
Yeah.
passing through until one part of like until they consumed a really big piece of plastic where they unfortunately probably choke on it. That's normally been the case. But I do believe in the future, I would say some species will probably adapt to kind of consume it because I mean, like as you said, like there are extremophiles in every like weird place and in the world. So
Yes.
I would believe it, Chris, definitely.
Yeah, and one of the things that I've read about before, and this is a while back, so it might even be further ahead, but they were looking at microorganisms that could basically eat away plastics. I don't know how that would work. Like if you introduce that into the wild, if that maybe has an unintended consequence. But that is maybe one of those hopeful things that maybe they can get something that kind of eats away at those pieces of trash, even if it takes a long time. It's better than not having anything kind of take away that pollution at all.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I think the issue with bringing or introducing a new species into the food chain is obviously it can have detrimental effects because then it can take
Yeah.
over and it might start to consume other species as well. But look, I think go for it anyway. I know they had an issue once before in the Black Sea where there was an invasive jellyfish species in there and it got through have you heard of ballast water? It's basically the water that they use in a ship to kind of balance out the ship. So
Okay.
that so they it was transported through the ship. And
Hey everyone, it's Chris, the host of Is It Just Speculation? What if I told you that you can make your very own podcast for free and you can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership required? That's Anchor. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast, and that's what I use. It has all the tools that you need in one place so you can record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. So you can work on the go or you can work at home in the comfort of your PJs. That's what I do sometimes. Don't tell nobody though. Anchor also distributes your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more places all around the world within a matter of moments. That's the beauty of Anchor. It really lets you have a message and get it out there. You have your own voice, guys. It's everything that you need to make a podcast in one convenient place. Please download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. You're missing out if you don't. Okay.
but essentially what they did was they had that invasive jellyfish species in the Black Sea and it was just killing off everything. And what they did then was they just brought in another jellyfish to consume the invasive species. And once
Yeah.
the invasive species was totally wiped out, the jellyfish that they brought in just completely died out because it didn't have anything else to eat. So I would agree with you. I think it's still relatively new, that organism that they think consumes the plastic. And I wonder,
Yeah.
can it survive in a marine environment as well? That's the other side of it. It might just be able to survive in a freshwater one. So I do need to look that up. That's really interesting. I did read a
Yeah.
small bit on it.
That would be good to follow up on if you ever have a
Yeah.
chance in the future. Um,
Yeah. I
you
think it's a
know,
type of bacteria. I think that can break it down. But
yeah,
I think
and
it's something to do with it's only one particular kind of plastic. But I mean, the fact that we've even advanced so far to even see that there is a specific bacteria that can consume plastic, I mean, we can definitely do something with that in the near future, I think.
yeah, I think that's also kind of one of the problems where maybe one plastic gets banned. Like BPA was a big issue not too long ago. So a lot of places banned BPA type plastics, and then they switched over to a different plastic that probably has the same negative side effects, but they don't have I guess, the research to show that it's dangerous yet. So I think that's kind of one of the other issues is even if we were to tackle one type of plastic, like we're talking about those good bacteria, that might not mean that they can get those other ones that end up being developed over time also. So I think it
Yeah,
is a constant battle for sure.
yeah, and I think a lot of countries as well, they see, especially when it comes to plastic pollution, there might be like a lot of kind of uproar from the people living in that country. They might say, ban this type of plastic, and then the
Mm-hmm.
politicians or people in government will be like, okay, we'll ban that and we'll bring in another one, when really it's just causing as much of an issue. Like, I mean, I know in Ireland, ever since COVID hit, in the supermarkets and stuff, they've started wrapping like every piece of fruit and vegetable with like single
Mm-hmm.
use plastic. It's just like, it's actually crazy. I'm sure it's probably the same in some supermarkets in America. And it's just so unnecessary. I mean, at the end of the day, you still should be washing your fruit and veg when you get home. So I don't think there is any need to be doing stuff like that. But I just think plastic is just a huge issue and it's only becoming worse and worse, especially because it's just affecting our world like massively, so
Yeah.
it's crazy.
Yeah. And how has the pollution specifically in Ireland affected things there?
I know with the plastic has been a big issue, and Ireland, I mean, most households are really big into, recycling, but for a long time we actually weren't able to recycle soft plastics. So that would be from maybe crisps or chip packets,
Okay.
and vegetable and fruit packets. We weren't able to recycle those. But I think it was just because we just didn't have the right technology, because I think it was 2 weeks ago now, Ireland brought in a new rule. So we're actually able to recycle our softer plastics now, which is great. But I mean, I think, is it only like 60% of recyclable plastic actually gets recycled
Yeah,
worldwide? I think a
there's
lot
been
of people
some
still,
controversy about that.
yeah, I mean, so like even if you're recycling your plastic, a lot of it still, I mean, a lot of people still don't recycle. So, I mean, the best thing to do is to buy, like, a reusable bottle. Don't
Mhm.
use single-use cutlery. That plastic cutlery you see in supermarkets and stuff is just deadly. And I mean, a lot of people went down the route of, I know everyone was so against plastic straws for ages, ever since they saw that video of the straw getting stuck up the
Oh
sea
yeah.
turtle's nose. But I mean, in Ireland, they've all changed over to like paper straws, which is, that's great. But I mean, like, we'll go into McDonald's and they'll give you like, you get like a Coca-Cola and they'll give you the paper straw in it, but then there's still a plastic lid on top. And you're like, I
Yeah.
mean, just the irony of the whole thing is just, it's crazy. I think we really do need to start with these huge companies, like, like Nestle,
Hmm.
all of those ones. I mean, the change has to come with them first, because we as like an individual can only do so much. It really is those mass producing companies where it's like, I think Nestle are just deadly. They're just, and even their destruction with the palm oil, because a lot of their products use palm oil, and they're just going to like cheaper countries, like third world countries, and just destroying the rainforests. And I think we really need to start with the mass producing companies to actually reduce their intake in single use plastic. And a lot of them are talking about, having zero carbon emissions by 2050. I don't think it's going to happen. I just think they're just throwing it out there to make
Yeah.
people feel happy and to kind of comfort them. But I really don't see it happening at all, because I think it's near impossible, really, when a company is that big.
Yeah, you brought up a good point. And, one of the things I was wondering is, especially where you're at, has the government efforts been successful in regulating to aid sustainability and kind of fight back pollution as well?
So I know our Prime Minister in Ireland, we call him Taoiseach, but I know he's been doing a lot of, public speaking about climate change and stuff. Oh, I think there's a lot of people upset here in Ireland, because Ireland, it's a great country in some ways. Like, we're so advanced, and we really have, like, for such a small island, we really have advanced, and we are a great like Western country, but we're so slow to act on new things. I find in Ireland, we look at other countries like the UK and other, European countries, and once we see what they're doing and the changes they're making, and as long as it's been positive, then we'll kind of jump on the bandwagon and we'll like
Mhm.
do the same thing. But I think Ireland still has such a long way to go. Like in Ireland, especially, I know compared to other European countries, like there's a lot of like dumping of garbage and stuff, and just it's not regulated enough. Like, you go to other European countries, like I would think Paris and stuff, and their streets and their cities are so clean. Whereas in Ireland, there are still some areas where a lot of like unregulated dumping goes on, and
Yeah.
we're just so relaxed on certain things that we really need to be kind of up in our game at the moment. We're a small island, but we still could make a big difference.
Yeah, just to throw this out there, I don't know any Texan that doesn't like Ireland or Irish people. So you are like at the top of the list when we think of like other countries. So for what it's worth.
Yeah. Oh no, that's great. I have heard that actually. Like a lot of Americans like Irish people. I think we're a very relaxed country, so I think that's
Mhm.
why. But we still have our issues too. Don't worry. You're like, honestly, like, and a lot of Irish people are just dying to come over to America as well. Because it's just, I think in America there's just bigger opportunities. So Ireland is,
Yeah.
that's the one problem. I love Ireland, but it's a tiny country. I don't know if you've ever visited yourself.
No, never. I wish I could though. It looks really beautiful.
Yeah, you should eventually. I think hopefully everything will have opened up by next summer. It's a really nice country, but I think it's time for me to uh spread my wings now and visit some other countries too.
Mhm. All right. So what is ocean sustainability and kind of like how does that play into your work?
So that's where really the aquaculture kind of comes into play with myself and ocean sustainability, because it's like ocean sustainability, it's basically all about approaching ocean management in a way that protects it and the services it provides. So we want to like keep our ocean, which is our huge natural resource, we want to keep that for as long as possible. That's what sustainability is, to not deplete the resource. So that's why I kind of work in the aquaculture industry, because we've already fished at our maximum capacity worldwide. So we can't keep overfishing. I know most countries worldwide are overfishing. Ireland is quite strict in it, and we are quite sustainable when it comes to the fishing regulations. But I mean, I think scientists have estimated we will have an extra, is it 2 billion people on our planet by 2050, and that means we're going to need an extra 70% protein that we're already producing from land and sea today. So that's why I'm like so invested in the aquaculture industry, because I think from what I've read, we actually only use 2% of our oceans for fish farming worldwide, because it's still so relatively new.
Yeah.
So I think we really should be using that. And as well with aquaculture, it has such a low carbon footprint. You know, when it comes to fishing and when it comes to agriculture, I mean, fishing particularly, you know, there's a lot of boats going out and just the fuels it's producing. And it's the same with the agriculture industry. I think it carries their methane gas and stuff. There's a huge
Yeah.
issue with that at the moment. So that's why I want to talk about aquaculture and kind of focus on that. And especially for, you know, lower income countries, like third world countries. I know there was a lot of issues surrounding, you know, I'm sure you watched that documentary Seaspiracy.
Yeah, I'm aware of it. I haven't got a chance to watch it though, but I am aware kind of what the, gist
Yeah,
of it was.
I wouldn't even call it a documentary, to be honest. I would call it just a propaganda film. It was just ridiculous. I
Mhm.
mean, he suggested that the whole world turn vegan and that we just stop eating meat and we stop eating fish, but it's just so unrealistic, especially for poorer countries where
Yeah.
fishing and fish farming, it's just that's their livelihood. And if we just stopped fishing and everyone turned vegan, I think it's 250 million people worldwide rely on fishing and aquaculture. It's just so unrealistic to even assume that. So that's why I want to push the aquaculture industry and, you know, talk about that. And there's a lot of issues. I think people are saying, you know, there's a lot of diseases that come with fish farms, like sea lice. So I know
Yeah.
here in Ireland, we like sea lice. There is always going to be an issue with sea lice when there's a lot of fish in close proximity. So sea lice is a parasite that just attaches on and it just feeds away. But what we do here in Ireland is we have another species of fish called lump sucker fish. So they live naturally in the wild and they have a little sucker on their stomach and they will attach to kelp. So what we do is we put artificial kelp in the sea pens because real kelp would break down naturally,
Mhm.
and we stick these little guys on the kelp, and it's a symbiotic relationship. So it's two separate species living in close proximity that mutually benefit.
Yeah.
So the salmon actually know that the lump suckerfish will eat the sea lice, so they'll swim through the kelp, and it's like the salmon are having like a spa day. So the salmon have like a little spa day, and then the lump suckers get a free lunch. So that's what we do, like to tackle those things. You know, there are always going to be issues when it comes to farming, whether it be on land or whether it be underwater. It's just approaching those issues with an open mind and tackling them and being honest about it, you know?
Yeah, with fish farming, can we tell how much it's helped so far, or is it maybe a little bit less than was hoped for? Like, how successful has it been so far?
Well, I know here in Ireland, I think 90% of the salmon that we consume here in Ireland is farmed. So it has helped a huge amount. And it's going to, I think, as in the near future, it's going to keep growing. And because I think it really did only start kind of booming, I think it was in the 70s, and then there was a lot of issues surrounding it. But now it's really kind of advancing. And I think by 2050, we really will just be mainly focusing in on aquaculture and fishing. I think fishing eventually will become a thing of the past. You're still going to fish, and especially like, you know, in Asian countries, fishing is still
Yeah.
going to be a huge part in their world. But I think in the bigger countries like, you know, Canada, America, stuff like that, we're mainly going to be focusing on aquaculture, especially because just the populations are just constantly increasing, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Um, One thing I did have a question about is talking about, environment impacts and kind of living with nature. As the population grows and natural habitats are impacted, can we even coexist at all, like on such a large scale? Like, is that really feasible?
Yeah, so I mean, that's the thing. As we constantly grow as a population, we're going to be tearing down a lot more rainforests. I mean, there's a lot of controversy surrounding that as well. I can't necessarily say. I would hope so. I did
Yeah.
read something online before saying, every other species, when they reach their maximum capacity as like a population, they do plateau. And I think we are still hoping as a human population, we are eventually going to reach our maximum capacity, and that will eventually plateau. So I think
Yeah.
that's with poorer regions kind of producing less kids and stuff like that. I think we will eventually kind of slow down in producing, more and more humans. But
Yeah.
as of now, I mean, yeah, I do worry about that sometimes, especially, the rainforests and stuff. And yeah, I mean, if it is just going to be more and more, they're going to be tearing them down, so that is a massive concern.
What are your thoughts of, and maybe it's different in Ireland than it is here, because here it's pretty politically charged. What are your thoughts on the politicization of science and how it impacts policymaking?
So it's a very fine line. I know I know people have some issues with certain scientists because scientists can be extreme. Like a lot of scientists have come up now around Ireland and stuff and said, oh, you can't fish anymore, it's done. you know, but there's just such a fine line between like the politicians taking on board what the scientists are saying and then the scientists kind of being extreme about it. But in Ireland, I mean, we will like give our advice and politicians will take it on board to a certain extent, but it's like a scientist might do his research and be like, okay, you can only fish I don't know, 30,000 tons of cod this year.
Yeah.
It's very hard to take it on board. And I know a lot of politicians and stuff in government bodies will be like, oh, okay, they say that, but which means we can actually fish 50,000 tons of the cod.
Yeah.
But it's not always the case. And I think we've been doing that for so long. We haven't been taking on board what the scientists are actually saying, that now we've reached this just huge concern when it comes to overfishing. And, a lot of people don't really believe what scientists say, but they are accurate. They have been working and they've been doing their research for years. So there is concern with that as well in Ireland. They're not really taking it on board.
Yeah, I think there may be like a disconnect between scientists, fishermen, and then the politicians, because all of them have different points of view on it. The politician just wants to set the rule and leave it at that,
Yeah.
but the fisherman sees it daily, how it affects them, and then you see over time how it affects the science of it. So there's like a
Yeah,
probably a disconnect in there.
there is. And I mean, I think there's a lot of pressure on the politicians too, because they're normally just in power for maybe 4 to 8 years max.
Hmm.
So in their head, they're like, well, I'm not going to be around in another 8 years to make the rules.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to make my people happy right now and then leave it at that. So I think there's a lot of issues surrounding that too.
So I do have some listener questions. These are maybe not as as serious as kind of what we've been talking about, pollution and sustainability. But they're interesting questions. So I thought I'd ask you those if you want to maybe give like a quick answer, since I don't want to, be disrespectful of your time.
Yeah, of
Um,
course, no problem.
how much of the ocean is unexplored?
Oh, I think I need to like double check this, but I think it's like 97% of the ocean is unexplored. We really like we think we've explored so much of it, but we really haven't because it's just so deep. So I mean, I think it's around we've explored. I think it's 95% of the oceans that are unexplored. I mean, we just see the surfaces and we see the Great Barrier Reef, but they're all really shallow depths. I think the deepest part of our oceans are, I think it's 10,000 kilometers, so it's higher than Mount Everest. And we have
Yeah.
loads of like deep sea trenches and stuff that are just totally unexplored. So yeah, I'm pretty sure it's 95% of our oceans that are still massively unexplored because of just how deep they are, which is crazy when you think about it.
Yeah, I think one thing that makes it hard to explore too is you can explore a given area, but the fish in that area are moving both sideways and up and down. So you
Yeah,
might miss it, as opposed to land, they're just moving sideways and you can kind of fence them in a way.
yeah,
I think
yeah.
that's probably part of the problem.
Yeah, and I mean, especially, with scuba diving, I mean,
Mhm.
the max we can dive as like or just a regular scuba diver is 40 meters. And I mean, the deepest part of our ocean is 10,000 meters. I mean, when you think of it like that, and like we can use underwater cameras and stuff, but it's still so difficult to explore these areas. It really is. It's like exploring space. It just is such a foreign area to us. We're just
Hmm.
humans. We just really are not adapted to living in the oceans anymore. I mean, just everything about it. We can't see, we can't breathe, we can't walk. So, I mean, I think we should. I know some people are just crazy about space and space exploration,
Yeah.
but for me, I'm like, we should kind of explore our own Earth first and then maybe focus on the rest. But that's just my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. Between the unexplored oceans, the deserts, what's under the sand, what's in the rainforest, like there's so much
Yeah.
that we don't know that
Oh,
we
well, like
probably would benefit from.
yeah, we're always discovering new species on land. So, I mean, can you imagine the species that we're going to discover when we really do start to kind of
Yeah,
invest in the oceans? It's going to be crazy.
for sure. So you mentioned something, about when we used to live in the water and the ocean. That's a good segue to this question, which is probably the least serious one, but I promised I would ask. What are your opinions on mermaids?
I love them, but I definitely don't think they're real. Just because I know that I think we would have seen them by now, like for sure. And especially an animal that big, let's just say a mermaid, okay, they're the same size as humans.
Yeah.
Humans cannot survive at those depths. I mean, you can't survive past 250 meters as a human without kind of, the pressure is really like crushing you at
Mhm.
the end of the day. So I think if there was mermaids in the waters, they would have to be living in really shallow areas. So from 0 to like 200 meters.
Yeah.
And I totally think we would have seen them by now. I wish they were real. A part of me would like to, I would love that. I mean, that would be amazing, but I just don't think it's possible. Scientifically speaking, I don't think so.
Yeah, let me ask it a different way, maybe. If evolution could make us come out of the water into what we are now, and then still at the same time have dolphins be what they are and as intelligent as they are, is it possible that it's maybe likely that there could have been a different evolutionary lineage?
I mean, there could have been. I mean, you can't deny that it is possible. I mean, we did evolve from the oceans, and obviously there are still mammals living in the water and stuff.
Mhm.
I just think humans really started to evolve once, like we evolved into the humans that we are today once we actually were on land for thousands of years. That's how our lineage is kind of related to, gorillas, chimpanzees, and stuff like that. They evolved from tetrapods basically, which were fish underwater. Like we all evolved from those tetrapods. So right now I personally don't think it would have been a case of us being mermaids at any point in our life, but you can never say never,
Okay.
so maybe we did have like a human slash kind of mermaid form, human slash dolphin maybe, kind of
Yeah, and
swimming
it's
around back
named
then.
it's named Michael Phelps.
Yeah, exactly.
So another question: do you watch movies? Fact check them as you watch.
Not every movie. I mean, certain movies, I mean, you're watching it for your own entertainment. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
watching Jaws and I'm not going to take anything that's on Jaws on board. But when I did watch the movie Seaspiracy, I sat down
Mhm.
and every time he threw out a fact, I did like pause it and I went and I did my research. That's
Yeah.
why it angered me so much, because so much of it was just so false. And I thought it was very unfair because he was so anti-fishing, anti-aquaculture when he said like the whole world was, bad and we should turn vegan. A lot of these poorer countries rely on that. And I thought it was very unfair just to kind of pick on those poorer countries when it's totally different world in America and in Ireland, where like we have a lot of money and we're Western countries. We have these we're extremely lucky to be able to live the way we want to live and to be able to choose whether or not we want to turn vegan or vegetarian. A lot of
Yeah.
these countries don't have that opportunity. So with movies like that, yeah, I would fact check it. If I was watching a documentary, maybe not a David Attenborough one, because I do actually really trust what he says.
Yeah. Yeah. He's pretty credible.
Yeah, he is.
Um, so, what fish or animal gets a bad reputation that's maybe unwarranted?
Jellyfish, I think. I'm so like pro jellyfish. A lot of people don't like jellyfish because I personally think they don't like them because it's hard to kind of relate to them. You know, they don't have eyes.
Yeah.
They just look like these giant blobs of goo floating in the water, and a lot of people don't like them because they give a really severe sting.
Mhm.
But I mean, they're over 500 million years old. They're older than dinosaurs. And I just think that's so fascinating. And like, there's a reason they've been around for that long, because they are needed in our waters. So a lot of people are just so against jellyfish. And, you know, when there's jellyfish blooms coming in, they're just like, oh, kill them all. But it's still an animal at the end of the day. So I think they're an extremely misunderstood species. And we have used a lot of, you know, products from jellyfish. You know, jellyfish are consumed in Asian cultures, and we've extracted the, I think it's called GFP, which is the green fluorescent protein from jellyfish, and we now use that in medical research as well. So there are a lot of benefits to jellyfish, but I think they're extremely misunderstood as well.
Yeah, and one thing I thought was really cool was I forget the species, but there's a jellyfish apparently that never dies in a way because it basically like restarts its life cycle. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, I don't know the species. I do know there is jellyfish. Basically, what he does is, so jellyfish start their life. They actually start their life kind of like as an anemone. So when they're being reproduced, they will attach themselves to the seabed. So they need a hard substrate to reproduce, and it's
Mhm.
like it's basically an upside down jellyfish. So they'll attach themselves to the seabed, and then they'll start producing polyps. So they'll just detach from the upside down jellyfish, and that in turn just produces, you know, single jellyfish. What that species does is he will be a floating jellyfish, let's just say, and then when the waters get cold or he doesn't have any food, he will convert back into the upside down jellyfish or an anemone, and he will just stay dormant for years. So until he can get food and stuff. But I think there's still more research to be done on that as well. But yeah, I read about him. Can't remember his name, but yeah, that's true. He'd essentially live forever.
Yeah, so definitely understand why you like jellyfish so much.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, they're
so,
they're really cool.
so last two questions, just to be respectful of your time.
No
What
problem.
are your thoughts on zoos and marine animals being in places like SeaWorld?
I don't agree with them. Not at all. I wouldn't even, they're like, I don't visit any zoos here in Ireland. I won't go to a circus if there's any animals in it.
Mhm.
And I mean, when I was younger, yeah, sure, when we went on holidays and stuff to like Spain and Portugal and stuff there, we did go and see, it was essentially SeaWorld in America, you know, and there was a lot of dolphins and seals and
Yeah,
stuff. But I just think mammals, especially, you know, marine mammals, they're just so intelligent. It's just such a shame to lock an animal like that in such a small area, especially orcas. I mean, orcas travel thousands of kilometers. I mean, they're so intelligent. And I get it. Like, you know, their benefits are, you know, they get food every day and stuff, but
yeah.
they're not designed to live like that. No animal, even humans, none of us are designed to live like that. We're designed to roam, we're designed to explore. So I definitely don't agree with any of them. And I feel I just wouldn't visit them. Yeah, I would be against them. I do think it's very cruel and unfair.
Would you say it's fair that it's a good introduction for kids when they're little?
I
Because
think it's a good
where else?
introduction.
Mhm.
Yeah, but I mean, I think go and visit an aquarium. I'm okay with the aquariums because the fish
Yeah.
are so small. Like you'll see tropical fish in an aquarium, and it really is the same as a tropical fish on a coral reef. They're not actually going to venture that far because that is their home. So they're
Mhm.
not a migratory species. So I don't mind that. I would say visit an aquarium. You know, I don't think you need to see an orca or a dolphin in
Yeah.
captivity to appreciate it, or you know, to be fascinated with it. There's so much out there now. I mean, we can do boat tours. I mean, you can see dolphins in the wild, you can see whales in the wild to appreciate it. You know, go to an aquarium. I'm okay with those for sure, but definitely not any marine mammals in captivity. No.
All right. Thank you for that. So, final question: what would you like people to take away from your work or yours and sorry, our conversation today?
Um, my goal really is just to for people to understand, you know, aquaculture and fish farming, and to not always believe what you read online. And you know, there's a lot of, you know, TV shows and documentaries, as they say, out there that are always going to kind of go against their like extreme environmentalists. Don't always believe what you read online. You know, do your research. you always, like, when you're doing your shopping and you're in supermarket and stuff, always read your labels and your packaging. Ask questions from where, like, check where your food is coming from. That's one thing I'll always do. Like, I'll go into my local fishmongers and I'll ask where our fish is coming from. I'll check their labels. And if it is a good product, it will always have like certain labels on it. Like in Ireland, we have M.Sc label, which is Marine
Mm.
Stewardship Council, and that just shows, the product is of its highest standard, and where the food is coming from is, the fishermen are really taking care of the products, and they're passionate about sustainability. So yeah, just ask your questions. Don't always believe what you read online, and yeah, just get out there and really explore what we have to offer in the marine world.
All right. Well, definitely thank you for your time. Um, I really appreciate it because it's something that I'm not really familiar with myself, and I know a lot of people. Like I said, we're in Texas. A lot of my listeners, and we really don't get an idea of aquaculture or marine life at all unless we go and travel like 10 hours. So
Yeah, I keep
it's
forgetting you
definitely
guys are
nice.
so far away from the sea. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's I think the closest would probably be like Corpus Christi or Houston, and
Wow.
those I would say those beaches are probably not the best example of what a beach is because
Yeah.
there's a lot of pollution in the big cities down there. So I appreciate you taking the time on you, and I'll go ahead and link your social media in the description.
Oh yeah, thanks,
Um,
Chris.
Not a problem. Is there any final thoughts?
No, it was great chatting to you, and it's I actually really liked how, you brought in the questions from the listeners, because I love answering those.
Yeah,
It's like, it's the public, you get a lot of questions from scientists and they're just so technical, and like sometimes it's really refreshing to hear just the public's questions. And no, it was great. It was great being on, and thank you so much for having me as well.
not a problem. You have a great day.
You too. Thank you so much, Chris.
You're welcome. Bye.
Bye.
I wanted to take some time to thank everyone for listening and sharing and just being part of the podcast community with me on this journey. One of the things I do is try to get some really good content and guests that really specialize in certain areas that maybe myself or people that I know really are curious about, like this guest and like my last one. So with that being said, if you know anybody that you think would be interested in doing a podcast that would be a really good guest for a specific subject or a variety of subjects, let me know, reach out, and get a hold of me, and we'll talk about it and see if we can maybe make it happen. Thank you.